Hey everyone, welcome back to another lesson. So in this one, we're going to talk about event listeners, which are going to add another type of, dimension to your programs. And also we're going to talk about a very interesting concept, which is, called higher order functions, which is basically a way that programming is done in Python. And it's very common, and you're going to see it all over the place when you look at a full code, which, is it's a good video to introduce you to these things. Anyways, so we're going to talk about event listeners. So what I want to show you is what is an event listener. So think about, we're going to use the Python turtle library, obviously, and we're still working with this because it's a pretty interesting library. It has a lot of different interesting stuff that can be used in Python. So what we're going to use is the listen events. So these are what they call screen events, and basically what these things do is they listen for commands. So for example, again, we got listen itself, we got on key, we got on key press, on click, on timer, main loop, and all these different things. And you can do so many interesting things with this. For example, for the listen itself, one of the things that you can do is that you can actually listen to a keyboard key basically and run a function. How interesting is that? So think about it. You can, for example, create a function in Python and bind it into a key, right? So that is going to allow us to create programs that are going to be interactive. They're going to do things that we tell it to do, right? So let's go ahead and actually pull up a Python project. Again, this is a brand new project and it is empty. All right, so I'm going to import some of this stuff from the turtle library. All right, so let's just clear this up real quick. So I'm going to import, for example, let's give it some more space so you guys there you go. Anyways, so we're going to say from turtle. Okay, we're going to import the turtle itself, and also we're going to import the screen. So again, these are the things that we need. Obviously the turtle, the entire class, and also the screen. And then we're going to make Tim. So I'm just going to say Tim. We're going to say turtle, and let's make a class. There you go. So that way we can actually use Tim itself. This is an object screen, and we're going to obviously use the screen class. All right. So just like that, we made our objects. Let's go ahead and create something. All right. So one of the things I want, the first thing I want to do is I want to run the listen. All right. So screen listen. There you go. So just like that, we're actually now listening for keybinds. All right. All right. So next step here is to actually use the on key. So if you actually go back here. Let's go back. There you go. So on key, take a look. So what we can do with this on key, module is that we can actually just, again, pass a function and pass a key, and this is going to allow us to run a command, right? Again, we got a function and a key. Now this is where things get really, really interesting. All right. So let's go ahead and actually make a, function. I'm just going to define a function. I'm going to call this move and forwards. Okay. All right. And let's just say Tim forward, and let's move 10. So basically this function is going to move the turtle 10 units, move it 10 units forward. That's basically what this is going to do, right? All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually call that on key and bind this function into a button. All right. So take a look at these things, the different ways that you can do it. So you can actually use a symbol. So like, for example, A, B, C, D, all these, like, again, key symbols. Or you can actually use the identifier. For example, for the space bar, you can actually use space or tab, for the tab bar. So like, again, you can use it in different ways. Again, so this is a function, and it doesn't require any arguments. That's the important part, right? I'll show you what this means exactly. But like, again, and also this is basically the key. All right. So let's go back here. All right. And let's say screen, and we're going to call it on key. All right. And then we're going to say key equals, and I'm going to, for example, say space. All right. and we're going to define the function that we want this to run, and I'm going to use the move forwards function. Now this is the important part. I see by default this is going to add the parentheses, because again, whenever you call a function, you want to obviously use the parentheses, but in this case you actually don't need this. You just need to call the function name itself and nothing else. And this is what I mean by, this section. It says, a function with no arguments. Okay, so again, just a function, these are the arguments of the function, right? So just like that, we have something that is going to that is going to call when we have a screen that is, when the space is pressed, it's going to run this function, which is going to move the turtle forward 10 units. All right, so let's actually make sure it doesn't close. So I'm just going to say screen exit on click, so that way actually the screen doesn't immediately close off. So let's actually run this and take a look at it. All right, there you go. So we got this, right? And if I actually hold spacebar, there you go, we're going to move forward. See, just like that. So this is basically how the event listeners work. They listen for an event, and when you press the button, they're gonna run a function. Now there is something important, right? If you remember, we actually called a function here. And this is a concept that we actually haven't talked about. And that is the idea that in Python, you can actually run functions within functions, all right? And this is a very, very important thing, because Python is one of the few programming languages that it allows you to do this. And this is going to allow you to do a lot of, run functions inside functions. And this is exactly what we call a higher, order function. Basically, you can call a function to use it in another function. All right. Now, another thing I want to mention before I use a very interesting example for you, another thing I want to mention is that when you actually are using when you're obviously entering the arguments to a function, whether, again, whatever this is, if you remember, we wouldn't we use the keywords here. We normally don't use the keywords. For example, this is the key, this is the fun, and the function. Again, if you remember, we go back here. We got the function, we got the key, right? So usually when you are using your own functions, when you're calling your own functions in a program, you don't need to do this, right? But if you're using, global functions, for example, this, obviously this is coming, this function, the onKey, all that stuff is coming from the turtle package, right? So when you're actually doing that, it's important to actually use the arguments, the keyword arguments, because if you think about it, we have two types, right? When in Python, you can actually, for example, define, let's say add, and we can say n1, n2, right? And you can actually technically call this later on, and you can replace these n1 and n2 with two different numbers. You don't actually have to say n1 equals 82 or something like that, right? You don't need to do that. But when you actually use a function that is coming from a package, it's important to use the keywords as well. So that way, you know exactly what you're referring to here. That is just going to help you. You don't have to. It just runs normally. But again, it's better to do it that way. You know exactly what you're working with, because you can make a lot of mistakes like that. Anyways, one of the things I'd like to actually point out here, let's just comment this out. I have, and I want to again demonstrate this, higher orders, all right, higher order functions. So I got a calculator code, and this is basically, again, something that we used, if you remember, in previous lessons or sections a long time ago, I think. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to define another function. I'm going to call it calculator, okay? And we're going to say n1, n2, and we're going to say func. So again, the idea with this is that I'm going to get numbers, obviously, right? And I'm going to get the function that we are going to use or perform, and use these two numbers and a function to get the final result. And here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to say function, and again, this function is going to replace whatever we get from these functions, and then we're going to say n1, n2, right? And just like that, and what I can do, let's actually make sure it returns. Okay, so, and just like that, we can actually create a calculator with just having functions inside a function, higher order functions, right? So result is going to be calculator, obviously we're going to have a calculator, and then we, for example, let's say I'm gonna put 210. All right, so, and we're going to also add a function, make sure it adds. See guys, now this is what I wanted to demonstrate here. Because I'm using my own function here, all right, I'm not using the keywords, because again, this is a function just with, you know, the positional arguments, right? So again, we're just having these arguments in the correct position based on the template that we have here, right? But again, if you're using outside packages, right, it's important to use keyword arguments. The keyword argument, again, this means that I'm going to say n1 equals this, n2 equals, you know, n2 equals this, and again, and then function equals add. So again, this is when you use a keyword argument instead of a positional argument. And again, it's, as I said, it's important to use keyword arguments if you're using someone else's or an outside package, because that way it's just going to be less confusing to you. But anyway, so let's actually print this. I'm just going to print results. There you go. And if I print this again, let's say we're going to add, so we're going to have to get 12, right? So yeah, there you go. So we just get 12. So if I want to say multiply, just put multiply here, there you go. And if I run this again, we're going to get 20, right? So just like that again, man, if I subtract, I think we're going to get some negative number. There you go, yeah, so 8. So just like that, guys, we, you know, we can again use a function inside another function, and this is one of the powers of Python, again, higher order functions. So I just want to demonstrate this again. You know, event listeners are actually a pretty big deal in Python, especially if you're using, you know, desktop related programs, obviously, or even some web apps that need to, you know, process some data. For example, let's say you're making a game in Python and you want to, you know, obviously get, like, you know, users input, like, you know, up, down, WSD, all that stuff. So that's basically how you lesson for an event. Anyways, guys, let me know if you have any questions about this. If not, I'll see you in the next lesson.